All right, so let's dive into it, right? Guiding principles for organizational adoption. Now, for those of you who are new to the world of Terraform, don't worry. I always like to do a bit of an introductory piece as well. So if you're new to infrastructure as code, you might have heard of the word Terraform being thrown around a little bit before. You might have just started using Terraform, or you might already use it extensively. Without, no matter where you are in a journey, what I always want to say is that Terraform has been one of the de facto tools for working with not only in the cloud, but also with many other systems, many other providers as well. Now, if you're new to Terraform, our secret sauce really comes in three folds, right? First, Terraform is an infrastructure as code tool. And what it does really well is that it enables you to do what we call workflow automation. So you want to provision something in, let's say, AWS, Azure, or GCP, you write a piece of code, and then you deploy automatically. Don't have to worry about going through the traditional ClickOps approach. Secondly, we also built into Terraform a system of record. And what this system of record allows you to do is now have this standardized workflow. So you have visibility across what you're deploying because you have it in code and you also have it in what we call a state file. And thirdly, Terraform has been built to work with a lot of different lifecycle management tools. An example of which is known as policy or policy as a code. So what you can do with policy as code is, as part of the provisioning workflow, the policies can be used to keep track and to govern any of your resources prior to deployment. So before you deploy, the policy can run and check whether this is meeting your organizational requirements, legal, regulatory requirements. And if it does, you can deploy. If it can't, it will give you that feedback. Now, as all of you would have known, or maybe those who are more experienced, you would know that Terraform isn't just a standalone tool. If you think about it from an enterprise context, to effectively use Terraform in your organization, it requires you to think about how do we thoughtfully allocate the right number of staff, resources, and processes to achieve a very notable return on investment. So really, I broke it down into two key areas, right? And two key areas where I find adopting Terraform has been pretty challenging from an enterprise context. Firstly, people and process. Now, Terraform operates maybe just like a tool. And what we've seen is that a lot of business units, they might adopt Terraform differently. Your data team might use Terraform differently from your infrastructure team, from your networking team, from your security team. Now, we often see a lot of siloed practices of its use. And what comes out of that is that you have different patterns, you have different modules, you have different practices. And that really inhibits the ability for you to implement best practices into your organization, simply because none of it actually exists. And then proper implementation of trying to implement that best practices gets really challenging in the long run. Firstly, because you have users now at different levels of experience with infrastructure as code and maybe with the type of systems that you use. And when you don't have best practices set, you have a decentralized adoption. You want to onboard new team members to your various teams. That becomes a whole lot more challenging as well. Now, secondly, people and process is one. You also have the type of consumption patterns that is available with Terraform. Now, cloud adoption and its migration is a change in technology, change in infrastructure patterns, and change in processes. So what this means is that in order for teams to properly adopt all these various changes, everyone needs to be involved in the discussion. So now if you think about it, you have different business units consuming Terraform without the centralized control. Your decisions and processes becomes invisible to the wider organization. So we start facing challenges around security, around compliance, and as it snowballs over time, it becomes really challenging when you need to have that team-to-team handoff because the consumption of Terraform is very different from one another. When you have one team not understanding the code written by a previous team, your speed of deployment is going to be affected because more time is spent trying to understand what the heck is going on, and rather than developing new solutions for business purposes. So we want to try and avoid all of that. And this really leads to the question, how do we build a framework of operations around Terraform? So with that in mind, the same challenges that we have, the people and process, it's also going to be our guiding principles. So I also want you to know every organization, you have its own unique requirements, unique practices. I don't expect one setup to be easily implemented into the other. But what I want to be able to provide today is a bit more of a prescriptive approach on how you can adopt Terraform. And we're going to take into account people and process and the consumption models. This particular section, we're going to dive into some of the key concepts that our customers have found very valuable as they're deploying Terraform in their orgs. Now, the most important aspects of adopting Terraform is defining an operations framework. And this operations framework, you want it to be very easy to implement, easy to scale, and more importantly, you want to also have a feedback loop in order for you to drive that continuous improvements. Now, this framework you can see on the screen right now consists of a few number of different functions. All these functions can be operated by or fulfilled by one or more different teams, really dependent on your organization. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit. Now, what you see on the screen right now is we have this operational model. The relationship between all the different functions, you will see it's being connected based on the arrows. And under the arrows, there's an underlying actions detailed with the number attached to those arrows as well. That's sort of a workflow we can start thinking from this operations framework. Now, at a high level, where this framework starts is you have a center of excellence. It's going to provide guidance to our tools team. Tools team work with our community of practice. So our consumers, all the different teams that needs to consume Terraform, they will provide us feedback as we go through a discovery workshops with the tools team. The tools teams will start building out this shared services model. They'll start building, maintaining, and supporting all these different modules dedicated to those shared service. And then what we also want to make sure we do is implement guardrails as part of the process. So our policy as code, which is built in collaboration with the security team. High-level approach, let's dive a little bit deeper. So we walked through a high-level workflow of the operations framework. You might see multiple different functions, but what I really want to think about is that there's really only two key groups that are involved. Firstly, you see the border around the screen. That's what we call the platform team. The platform team is a central hub within the organizations. They orchestrate various functions. They also streamline operations between various teams. But when you create a platform team, there's also a few functions I want you to keep in mind. We talk about the cloud center of excellence. Now, this particular function is the strategic arm of the platform team. They drive cloud adoption. They align cloud strategies with your business objectives. I say cloud, but it's really whatever on-premise environments that you have as well. What they also do is that they establish governance frameworks, they foster knowledge sharing, and they optimize your resources or your infrastructure resources to maximize its value or ensuring it adheres to compliance within your organization. What you also have is then next is your tools team. Now, the tools team operate as a technical component of your platform team. This particular function manages the tools and the automation to support all your system operations. What the tools team basically does is that they get hands-on and they implement what we call golden workflows. They build out the reusable modules based on the shared services. They collaborate with the stakeholders, your community of practice essentially, to ensure that whatever services they need is going to be aligned to their projects and their projects' directives. What we will typically see with the tools team is that it can operate as a sub-team or a separate team, or they can operate as a single whole where the CCOE and the tools team are one massive team. Now, thirdly, part of the platform team as well is the consideration of infrastructure as code and policy as code practices. So the platform team's responsibility here is to set the intent for infrastructure as code and policy as code. This is, of course, done with security, because what you want to do is ensure that whatever you're building out, those guardrails adheres to best practices, adheres to organization standards as well. And what this particular code base does is that it promotes standardization, scalability, and compliance across all the various projects your organization might have. Now, one thing to keep in mind is how do you distribute manpower across all these different teams? I know that one of the greatest challenges we have in this day and age is that the shortage of skilled workers for our organization. Truth of the matter is finding the right magic number is really going to be dependent on who you currently have in your organization and what your roadmap looks like. But one thing I want you to know is that all the roles, all the functions that I talked about just then, they're all cross-functional. That means you have engineers in the tools team. They can operate both as a hands-on specialist, but likewise, they can also operate as an architect to help strategize your engineering approach. What's really important is to understand where does your organization currently fit in this journey, right? Are you a startup? Are you a small, medium enterprise, or are you a large enterprise? Because that really determines how quickly or how much flexibility that you have. If you see it from the perspective of a startup, your priority is really to move faster, right? And get resources built out a lot faster as well. And in that space, you see startups having a ratio of one CCOE member to three tools members, right? Because you really want to have one strategic person and three engineers or more to start building out your different consumption or shared services. Now, as your organization scale and it grow into a medium and large enterprise, the speed of development actually slows down. And the reason being, the impact of all the changes you're going to make, it's going to be much greater than when you were a startup. A lot more caution is going to be required as you go into this development phase. So in this scenario, the narrative is going to be flipped a little bit, right? The number of engineers might slow down, might actually stay the same because they're going to be focused on maintaining, on building out, or improving the current services. But your number of resources in the CCOE team or the Center of Excellence team might grow a little bit more because they need to manage a greater scale, a greater stack that you currently have in your organization. Now, one thing you want to consider as well is that the platform team has the responsibility of what we call producers. So producers configure the system to meet your consumers' needs, and the consumers will also utilize all the shared services provided by the platform team or the producers. As a producer or as part of the platform team, you need to keep in mind that the platform that you're building right now, or this operations framework, is going to be your product. Your responsibility of a producer is that you own the product, but you must also think about how do we help consumers use this product. Now, as a producer, you want to make sure that you have a few well-defined processes to help consume this product. The first being a strong documentation for any consumers at any level to onboard and consume the product themselves. You want to have that feedback loop to address any new features or bugs coming out of those shared services. And number three, you want to have a onboarding process for new employees to teach how you as an organization operate infrastructure as code, how this Terraform platform that we've built, how does it actually operate as well. Ultimately, your goal is to get your products into the hands of the consumers, no matter what level of maturity that they have. Think about it as the more adopted your product is, the greater the opportunity for you to scale, grow, and improve on it. Now, on the other half of the spectrum, we have the platform teams. We have platform teams building out the assets for consumption. The other side of the spectrum, we have other teams who will be consuming that shared service. Your consumers are going to be network team, infrastructure team, security, application development team. Opposite of producers are consumers, and we call those teams the consumers because they will utilize the shared service by your platform team, and their responsibility is number one, initiating the request to access that Terraform platform for provisioning all those modules and consuming those modules. But number two, if they need to write Terraform code as well, they're going to be based on all the modules that has already been created by the platform team, and they also need to follow the best practices established by the platform team. This collaboration ensures that your shared services are readily accessible and efficiently utilized. And this also unlocks the benefit of the Terraform platform to meet business needs and adhere to your guidelines and to your standards. Now, I know that the adoption of Terraform is a journey. I'm sure all of you would know that as well. In order for your platform or your operations framework to be successful, you need to have, firstly, the right consumers with the right interests and right maturity. What a persona that might fit that is really users who are born in the cloud, who are able to adopt the cloud, who knows infrastructure as code is the right way to go for the long-term solution. Maybe those are the users that you want to start looking at to onboard onto your Terraform platform. And then at HashiCorp, what we've also done is that we've understand that Terraform is a journey. So we've built out what we call a maturity model, as you can see on the screen right now. Now, this maturity model is going to act as a blueprint for how you can use Terraform to deliver your infrastructure as code provisioning and for your management as well. And we start at different stages of your journey. The three stages that we cover is adopting, standardizing, and scaling. So the adopting stage is really all about being able to compose infrastructure as code, being able to collaborate with different teams or different users within your team to write that code. Standardizing is all about ensuring we can publish and distribute reusable modules for consumption, as well as implementing guardrails as you do the provisioning process. And then scaling is all about being able to have the platform team provide the services without being burdened by additional work. So scaling is all about being able to provide self-service capabilities to the rest of your organization. It's a lot more content to go through. I'll leave this on the screen for just a couple more seconds so you can have a quick look at it. Otherwise, feel free to always refer back to the recording to get more details around this blueprint. The next part that we're going to cover is consumption models. I know we're running a little short on time, but I'm going to do my best to cover it in the next 5 minutes. But the second pillar, consumption models, we know for a fact that number one, speed to market, very crucial competitive advantage. Practices like adopting infrastructure as code is going to be very essential in this space. What we've seen from our customers that has been very successful for them is two types of consumption patterns or two types of consumption models. First is your service catalog, and then you have your infrastructure franchise. Note that both of these models can coexist, but if you want to be highly effective, it's worth considering to only begin with one model first because it requires the right focus and right number of resources to create this particular consumption models. So take it as a journey, take it slowly, and identify which one works best for your initial use cases. The service catalog consumption model focuses on providing a standardized approach and a reusable approach to consumption of Terraform modules itself. So what this includes is being able to define a core set of standard infrastructure modules that can be consumed easily. Your customers or your consumers, all they need to do is choose what they need. Upon selection, they will then have some limited customization available, like choosing where to deploy, what tags to attach to it, what size instance, for example, if it's a virtual machine, and then the Terraform platform would automatically deploy it for them. Infrastructure franchise, on the other hand, they operate like a real-life franchise. You want to be able to enable business units to operate almost like an independent entity, but they still follow the strict frameworks, the strict best practices created by the platform team. So this allows end users to be really empowered to build and run their infrastructure independently, to have more flexibility in the customization, but still following the best practices and still adhering to the guidelines established by the organization. How do we actually build out a service catalog or an infrastructure franchise? I'm going to break it down for you. So firstly, if you take a look at service catalog, it's really two key components. What you need first is a vending portal. It's a central platform. Users can go in there. They can have a view of a registry that contains all the reusable modules that's available and has been marked approved by the central or the core platform team. And secondly, what they need is a pre-configured component. Basically, any infrastructure modules that has already been created, it can look like an entire application stack all the way down to individual infrastructure layers, like your networking layer or just your database layer. The end goal is to guarantee uniformity in your infrastructure deployments. An example of a service or a vending portal tool is the likes of, in the open source world, you have Backstage. At HashiCorp, we provide a tool called HashiCorp Waypoint or HCP Waypoint. Or if you have an enterprise tool, it looks something like a ServiceNow. There are two paths in the service catalog. You have custom stacks for users who wants to define their own stack. The only challenge is there's additional layer of planning and design that's required if they want to build out their own reusable modules. So it takes a little bit more time. What we suggest is choosing from an already standardized and created stack. And this allows your teams who want to provision those resources to have that accelerated service because you don't have to go through the planning and design phase. Another few features that you might want to consider as you build out this service catalog. Number one is a private registry. And what you want to do here is that you can use modules already on the public registry, but private registry allows you to fork them, make them more specific and tailored to your organization, and maybe even more security compliant as well. And this private registry is used only for users within your organization. Then you also want to have the ability to integrate with third-party certified tools that has been part of the provisioning process. Now, if you go on Terraform registry, you'll see that we have a lot of third-party vendors that we work with that has been certified to work with our platform, but you can also see them as an alternative if you're building out your own Terraform platform. If you're looking for something that can get you on the ground running immediately, we provide a platform called HTTP Terraform. It has all these features. It has this particular workflow built out already. If you want a little bit more information, feel free to reach out to me. We call this platform the HTTP Terraform platform, or previously we also call it the Terraform Cloud platform as well. As for the infrastructure franchise, likewise, two major components to consider. You need to have that central control team or that platform team. We call this the franchiser. This team provides franchisees the workflows, the modules to use. They're also responsible for maintaining your Terraform platform. Then you also need to consider your consumption workflows because you want to be able to onboard your end users in a very appropriate and very easy to understand manner. And this end users needs to provision resources in accordance to what your guidelines will look like. So one thing to consider as you're implementing the infrastructure franchise model is that you want to keep your policy as code up front and center, because all these controls, the earlier you build them and have it in front of your provisioning process, the higher ability you have in shifting your security a bit more to the left so that it adheres to the organizational standards as well, as you can see on the right side of the diagram. So some of the features that you want to consider as you bring out the infrastructure franchise, you want to have a very well thought out GitOps approach. That might look like a very good repository management pattern, some CI/CD pipelines that also include third-party technologies like open policy agents. Now, if you look for it from a HP Terraform perspective, we provide something called projects, which are essentially mapped to your application projects that you would have. We have workspaces as well that acts like separate directories that contains your state files, your sensitive variables, your configuration information as well. And we can group them in a very meaningful and structured manner. And then we have sentinel policies as well. So sentinel policy work as our policy as code. So you can have very fine-grained controls as to what should be provisioned, what shouldn't. And some examples would be cost control, network access, etc. Likewise, both options are great. If you're building your own, you want to be able to follow some of the capabilities that is also available on HP Terraform. I know I'm up to the last couple of minutes, so I guess I'll just leave you with one final thing, which is a golden infrastructure as code workflow. Ultimately, what we want to get from this operation framework is to be able to build out this workflow that is going to be a standardized, repeatable process for you to complete a specific task or for you to achieve a specific outcome. Now, this infrastructure as code workflow, you want to make sure it's well documented, well tested. And often what we typically see is that these golden workflows will help you facilitate your automation to a higher level. It helps you with communication and collaboration. And ultimately, it also uses pre-approved Terraform configurations as well as curated modules. When you implement this as a platform team, you want to ensure that your teams are able to independently provision infrastructure while maintaining that centralized management and control using your best practices. So the diagram I have on the screen right now is basically a workflow that encompasses both the the service catalog approach as well as an infrastructure franchise approach. You can break it down in according to what your needs are.
So once again, before I close up the session, I'd like to thank Sam for today's session. Thank you for taking the time to share with the audience today on Terraform and how to implement it in the organization. And for the rest of you, hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you in the next snapshot session. Thank you.
Thanks all.